The silence in that elevator was the kind that has weight. My brother stood next to me, close enough that I could smell the scotch on his breath, and I watched him look me up and down the way he always had, like I was something he'd stepped in. I was wearing my navy blazer, the one with the small gold pin on the lapel that meant absolutely nothing to him and everything to the people waiting on the 40th floor. I kept my eyes on the numbers climbing above the door. 37, 38. I had learned a long time ago not to look at him when he did that. "You know you don't have to come in," he said. "I can just tell them you're with me. Save everyone the awkwardness." I smiled at the doors. "I'm good," I said. He shrugged. He had the kind of shrug that dismissed entire people. The doors opened on 40, and my brother walked out first because he always walked out first, and I followed him into the marble lobby of Hargrove Capital, where my father's retirement gala was already in full swing. I need to tell you who I was before I tell you what happened in that room. My name is Claire. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a house where my father kept his law school diploma above the fireplace, and his expectations even higher than that. My father, Robert, was the kind of man who entered rooms and rearranged them just by standing there. He had silver hair and a handshake that made partners nervous, and he had spent 30 years building one of the most respected names in corporate finance in the Midwest. He had 2 children. My brother, Daniel, who played lacrosse and went to Dartmouth and looked exactly like the son my father had always sketched in his mind. And me. I was the one who didn't sketch right. Not because I wasn't smart. I knew I was smart from the time I was 8 years old, and my 3rd-grade teacher called my mother to say she wasn't sure what to do with me. That I kept finishing the work before she finished explaining it. But smart, in my family, was not the same as impressive. Impressive was Daniel getting recruited by 2 Wall Street firms before graduation. Impressive was Daniel's corner office and Daniel's golf handicap and Daniel's easy laugh at dinner parties. Smart was just something I did quietly, in rooms nobody watched. I graduated summa from Ohio State because I couldn't afford Dartmouth, and my father didn't offer to help me try. I went to law school at Georgetown on a full scholarship, which I did not announce at dinner because dinners in our house were about Daniel's bonus that quarter. I passed the bar on my first attempt. I took a position at the Department of Justice that paid less than a first-year associate at a private firm and meant more to me than anything I had ever been offered. I did not tell my family what I actually did there. Not because I was hiding it exactly, but because no one ever asked. My mother knew I was a lawyer. She told people at church I worked for the government, the way you might say someone worked at a library. My father knew I was in Washington, which he mentioned once by saying, "At least the city's interesting." My brother called me the public servant at Thanksgiving, the year I turned 30, and everyone at the table laughed, including me. Because if you don't laugh at those things, you have to feel them instead. The retirement gala for my father was Daniel's idea. A proper send-off, he'd said. The firm's partners, the big clients, the people whose names you read in the business section. He planned it at Hargrove Capital because a partner there owed my father a favor, and because Daniel understood the value of the right address on an invitation. He'd called me 3 weeks before to tell me I was welcome to come, in exactly the tone of voice that suggested he'd be mildly surprised if I did. I came. I came because my father was retiring and he was still my father, even now. I came because there were 37 years of mornings I had eaten cereal across the table from him, hoping that day would be the day he looked at me the way he looked at Daniel. I came because you keep hoping. That's the thing about family. You keep hoping even when the hoping has made you tired. What I did not tell my brother when he asked me if I needed him to introduce me around was that 2 weeks before this gala, I had been named Deputy Assistant Attorney General of the United States. Not acting, not interim, confirmed, sworn in, assigned to oversee a division with 400 attorneys and a budget with more zeros than I sometimes remembered to count. I was 32 years old. My name had been in the Federal Register. There had been a ceremony in a wood-paneled room in Washington where a woman I had admired since law school shook my hand and told me the country was lucky to have me. I had called my mother that evening and she had said, "Oh, that's wonderful, honey. Your father's having his physical tomorrow. Did I tell you they found something with his cholesterol?" No. She had not introduced that topic at the right moment. So I came to this gala with the pin on my lapel and the title I had not announced and the 32 years of being the quiet one who didn't sketch right, and I followed my brother off the elevator and into that room. The gala was beautiful. I will give Daniel that. There were flowers on every table, white and gold, and the skyline sat in the windows like it had been arranged there. And 200 people moved through the light with their glasses raised, and their names in my brother's memory for exactly as long as they were useful to him. A string quartet played near the bar. My father stood near the center of the room, holding court in his dark suit, silver and solid, laughing at something a man in cufflinks was saying. He saw me come in. He raised a hand in acknowledgement, not a wave exactly, more like a flag being dipped, and turned back to his conversation. Daniel was already working the room. He had the ability to move through a crowd, the way water moves through a landscape, finding the lowest path, the one that required least resistance and offered most reward. I watched him shake hands with 3 men in the first 2 minutes and thought, not for the first time, that he had been extraordinarily well trained for the life my father had wanted to give him. I got a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and stood near the windows and watched the city for a moment and let myself be invisible. I was practiced at invisible. A woman named Patricia, who had been my father's assistant for 11 years, found me by the windows and hugged me and asked how Washington was treating me, and I said fine, and she said she'd always thought I was the interesting one in the family, which she meant kindly, the way people mean it when they say interesting instead of successful. An hour into the evening, my father stood up to speak. He was good at speaking. He talked about 30 years of handshakes and hard calls and late nights and the people who'd sat across the table and trusted him with the things that mattered. He thanked the partners. He thanked Patricia. He got a little emotional when he talked about my mother, which surprised me, because I had not seen him get emotional in years. And then he talked about Daniel. He talked about Daniel for 4 minutes. I counted. He talked about the pride of watching his son build something real, the satisfaction of knowing the work had been worth it, that the name meant something now in 2 generations. Daniel stood near the front and accepted it with the practiced modesty of someone who had been prepared his whole life to receive exactly this. Then my father said, "And my daughter Claire is here tonight, all the way from Washington," and he looked out into the room and found me by the window and smiled the way you smile at someone you are glad is present and do not quite know what to say about. And that was my mention. That was it. I smiled back. I raised my glass slightly. I kept my face exactly where I had learned to keep it, in the neutral country between hurt and fine, and I clapped with everyone else when my father sat down and the room refilled with conversation. I was going to leave after the dinner. I had a car coming at 9. I had a flight back to Washington in the morning and a briefing at 7:30 that I needed to be sharp for. I had told myself coming in that I was not here to be acknowledged. I was here because he was my father, and it mattered to show up, even when showing up had its costs. But then Daniel found me at the table during dessert. He sat down next to me with the loosened tie ease of a man who'd had 3 glasses of wine and a successful evening, and he put his arm on the back of my chair in a way that was technically not touching me, but was intended to signal ownership of the surrounding air, and he said, loud enough for the people nearest us to hear, "You know, Dad almost didn't put you on the program. He wasn't sure if you were going to make it." I put down my fork. "I almost didn't," I said. "Right, because of your job." He said it the way you might say your hobby. "What is it you're doing now?" "Still at Justice." "Still at Justice. He swirled his wine. "I keep meaning to ask, what's the title again? Some kind of coordinator?" The man to my left, a senior partner at a firm whose name I recognized, a man named Gerald Fitch, 60-something, the kind of careful face that has seen a great many things, and given away, very few of them had gone slightly still in the way that attentive people go still when something interesting is about to happen. "Something like that," I said. Daniel smiled. He had a very nice smile. He had used it on people his whole life. "You should look into private practice at some point," he said. "I know some people who could probably find a spot for you. Something you could actually build on. No offense, public sector's fine, but there's a ceiling, you know?" He said it gently. That was the thing about Daniel. He was never cruel the way a villain is cruel. He was dismissive the way weather is dismissive. Impersonally. Without malice. As though the small size of the box he'd put you in was simply a fact about the world. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "I appreciate that." He nodded, satisfied, and started to turn back toward the room. "Daniel." My voice was very quiet and very even. The voice I used in rooms in Washington when I needed people to listen. "Do you know what I actually do?" He turned back. There was something in my face he hadn't seen before, or hadn't noticed, and it made him hesitate. "You're a lawyer at Justice, you said." "I was confirmed 6 weeks ago as Deputy Assistant Attorney General," I said. "I oversee the Civil Division. 400 attorneys. I report directly to the AG's office. The day after this gala, I'm briefing a Senate subcommittee on federal enforcement priorities. I paused. That's my ceiling. The table was quiet. Gerald Fitch, to my left, had set down his glass. Daniel's expression moved through several countries, very quickly surprise. Recalculation. Something I might have called embarrassment if I thought he was capable of it in that register. You never, he started. No one asked, I said. Simply. As a fact about the world, impersonal, just like his dismissals, he opened his mouth and closed it. And that was when Gerald Fitch said in a measured voice, "Your sister has been handling some of the most consequential civil enforcement work in the current administration. I've been reading her name in briefings for 2 years." He looked at Daniel with the courteous precision of a man who had no time for nonsense but was too well-bred to say so directly. I assumed you knew. The conversation around us, which had quieted to a murmur, felt like it was holding its breath. Daniel laughed too short, too bright, and said something about being out of the federal loop and turned the conversation, because he was good at turning conversations, and I let him, because I had not come here to humiliate him. I had come to see my father, but the room had heard. I found my father an hour later, near the windows where I had stood at the beginning of the evening. The crowd had thinned. He was holding a glass of water and looking out at the city with the expression of a man reviewing something long and complex, the kind of mental work that comes at the end of a significant chapter. He heard me approach and turned. Claire. He looked at me differently than he had when I walked in. Word travels at parties. Someone had told him, or he had overheard, or Gerald Fitch had found occasion to mention it in the way that Gerald Fitch seemed to find occasion to mention things. I didn't know, he said, about the confirmation. I know, I said. You should have told me. I looked at him for a moment. There was a version of me, the version who had counted 4 minutes, who wanted to ask him why the telling was supposed to be my work, when the asking had always been available to him. But that version was tired. That version had been tired for a while. I'm telling you now, I said instead. He was quiet for a moment. The city blinked behind him. I'm proud of you, he said. Slowly, like a man reading from a text he is unfamiliar with. I should have said that more. I had waited 32 years for those words. I had imagined them 100 times, in 100 versions. I had expected that when they finally came, something large would happen inside me, some wall coming down, some long-held weight releasing. What I felt instead was something simpler and stranger, the quiet recognition that I had built everything I had built without them, and it had been enough, and it would continue to be enough. And the words were welcome now, not because I needed them to stand, but because I had already been standing. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. We stood together at the window for a few minutes, the two of us, looking at the city in the way that people look at things when they are trying to find words that fit, and don't quite, and decide that the looking is enough for now. When I left, I shook my father's hand and kissed his cheek and said goodbye to my mother, and nodded to Daniel from across the room and walked out through the marble lobby to the elevator and stood there watching the numbers descend. In the lobby downstairs, my phone buzzed. A message from my office. A briefing had been moved up. They needed me on a call at 6:30 in the morning, instead of 7:30. I wrote back that I would be there and put the phone in my pocket and walked out through the revolving doors into the Columbus night. The car was waiting. I stood on the curb for a moment before getting in, just a moment. Just enough to let the October air sit on my face and let the evening settle into whatever it was going to be when I looked back on it later. I had walked into that building as the daughter who didn't sketch right, the one who got half a sentence at the podium, the public servant with her government job and her ceiling. I was leaving as exactly who I had always been, which was the same person with or without the recognition, but tonight the recognition had come, not with fanfare, not the way I'd imagined it, but quietly by the window, from a man who had taken 32 years to look up. You can want both things. You can need neither thing to survive and still be glad when it arrives. I had learned that, and I thought about it in the car on the way to the airport, watching Columbus give way to the highway, the lights growing sparse. 3 years later, I was in Washington when my father came to visit. He came alone, which surprised me. My father had always been most comfortable with an audience. He came in the fall, when the city was at its most serious and most beautiful, and I picked him up at Union Station and drove him past the monuments the way you do when someone visits for the first time and acts like they haven't been here before, even when they have, because the monuments are the kind of thing people need to see fresh each time. I had a dinner that evening. I could not miss a small thing. Just 8 people, a senior official from another agency and a few of her staff. Nothing formal, but the kind of dinner where presence matters. I almost rescheduled it. Then I didn't. My father came with me. We arrived at the restaurant together, and the host knew my name and showed us to the table, and the senior official stood when she saw me and shook my hand and said she'd been looking forward to this. And around that table, I was not the quiet one who didn't sketch right. I was the person they had come to hear. I asked questions and answered them. And the conversation moved through serious things with the ease of people who spent their days on serious things. And my father sat next to me the whole evening and said very little and watched. On the way back to my apartment, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You've built something real." He said it the way he had said, at his gala, that he watched Daniel build something real. The exact same words. I don't know if he knew that. I chose to believe he didn't. I know, I said. I should have been paying attention sooner. You're paying attention now, I said. That counts. He nodded. He looked out the window at the city. I don't know that we ever fully repaired what had been thin between us. I don't know that repair is always the right word. Some things don't get repaired so much as they get accepted, and then built around. And then eventually the building around becomes its own kind of structure. And you live in it. And it holds. We talked more in the years after that dinner than we had in all the years before it. He called on Sundays, which he hadn't before. He asked questions, which he hadn't before. He was not transformed. He was just paying attention. That turned out to be enough. My mother told me once, near the end of that visit, that my father had told Patricia, his retired assistant, about my confirmation. She said he had used the word brilliant. She said it quietly, the way you pass something fragile from one person to another. I thanked her. I thought about that word on the flight back from Columbus the night of the gala, in the October dark, somewhere over Ohio, the state I had grown up in, and left and carried with me the way you carry the places that first taught you who you were. Brilliant. I had been that all along. I had sat across the cereal bowls from a man who never asked. I had built a career in rooms he didn't know about. I had shown up anyway, year after year, gala after gala, holiday after holiday, because that is what you do when someone is your father. And then one evening by a window in Columbus, 40 floors above the city, he looked up. It wasn't the beginning of the story, but it was the moment the story changed.